Things just happen because it's always been done that way. The veteran community is, we're trained to basically not complain, do your job. If it's bothering you, that's your problem, not mine. Figure it out. And so that's what we do.
So how I know Kurt is a combination of places, but the main thing that I wanted to talk to him about today is his Challenge 22 because he started that almost a decade ago, and it's really helped a lot of veterans because, and I'll let him kind of tell the story, but he saw a huge problem, which also created a big opportunity for him to kind of step into that problem.
And so we created this organization called Challenge 22 to end veteran suicide. And just to give the folks on the podcast a feel for the scale, since 9/11, we've lost about 160,000 to suicide. In Korea, we
It's
lost
almost
38,000.
unbelievable.
And in Vietnam, we lost 58,000.
If you could go back and give your younger self advice, what would it be? And it doesn't have to be financial. Welcome to PlanAssist Podcast, where we interview successful business owners and leaders to help you make better financial decisions. PlanAssist is not an investment. It's not a product. It's built around a process, first principle processes to help you maintain and grow your wealth over time. And really at the core of PlanAssist process is three questions. Is your lifestyle aligned with your income? Is your income resilient and diversified? And are you making progress on both? And what we try to do is help you answer yes to all three of those questions. And though those are individual questions, this podcast is primarily focused on those of you who are solopreneurs, small business owners. And so those questions are still very, very good questions to be asking from a business perspective as well. So today I am super excited to welcome Kurt Gies. He's retired U.S. Navy Civil Engineer Corps Commander and founder and CEO of Challenge 22. After 25 years of military service, Kurt now leads an effort to end veteran suicide by raising awareness, connecting veterans with resources, and bringing communities together. He's also brings decades of engineering and construction experience and overseeing major military facilities and construction projects around the world. And I actually met Kurt through the construction and through church here locally. So he's also worked in the small business world of helping run his own small business, running Challenge 22 and running subcontractors. So he has a lot of experience for those of us that are solopreneurs and small business owners. So with that, welcome to today's call.
Well, thank you, Tim. Appreciate the intro.
Is there anything you want to add to that or anything I miss?
Well, the only other thing is I've been in the real estate broker for about 15, 20 years and have had a small business in that respect too. So not only the construction company, but on the real estate side. So
That's awesome. So today, what we're gonna talk a little bit about kind of small businesses. We'll get into AI, a whole bunch of different topics, but it's very casual conversation. But I start all these podcasts off with the same question, and that is, if you could go back and give your younger self advice, what would it be? And it doesn't have to be financial.
well, I think that the bit of advice that I was given is one I would pass on to, I do pass on to all my kids. You need to set up a budget early on in life. You need to be putting aside something, whatever you can afford to put aside, to get in the habit of saving. And the other thing that I've done, and I'm 62 years old. My first credit card I got when I was 20. I have never, well, I put everything on my credit cards. I very rarely use cash. I have never paid a finance charge in my entire life on a credit card.
Wow, that's an accomplishment. Oh my gosh.
And what caused that was I don't know if I want to call it tricked, but duped into my very first credit card when I was in college, and this was 1982 or 83, to buy an American Express card that cost me $75. It was like very expensive back then, and you had to pay it off every month. And I'm like, what's that? I thought you. And so, as a result of that, I got in the habit of I only spent what I could afford. And if I
Yeah.
could pay it off each month, I just didn't put it on card. And it was a really good way to learn discipline. It was easy in college. I didn't, the income was almost nothing. So expenses had to be almost nothing. But when I got into the Navy, my very first tour, I was in Orlando. I met a guy who was with one of the, financial companies, I can't remember the name of it now, but he introduced me to dollar cost averaging.
Uh-huh.
And so I did dollar cost averaging for the very first 15 years of my career. And it never really added up to much because I didn't put much aside, but again, it gave me discipline to do that. So the only thing that I would give myself advice for if I said, hey, Kurt, you could do this differently is after doing all that, you need to take some risk. And I never was good at that. I was very, my parents were very, they were high school teachers, didn't have much income. So money was always scarce. And I didn't understand taking risks that was calculated and measured. And my dad had an opportunity to invest in this company in the 60s. It was ground floor stuff, but he would never invest in a company that started with an X, and it was Xerox. And so we always gave him a hard time by that. We could have been rich.
Now, do you think part of that is your engineering background? Because I work with engineers. I mean, well, I work with you for God's sake. So engineers do have a tendency to almost over analyze it. Not
Oh,
always, but it is kind of a
no, we
side of
overanalyze. We are very good at solving problems. We take lots of data in and
uh,
then we come up with solutions. The one thing I didn't mention too is I was actually a lender for about 15 years. And so I would get into the financials of folks way
oh,
more.
so that's probably bigger than your engineering
Yeah,
background. You
that was a
saw
big
the
impact on my.
nightmares of people's
Yep,
finances and
yep,
chaos that was holy
yep.
Moses.
I didn't know a credit score could be in the 400s, but
See,
there were some.
yeah, I've been kind of fortunate because my main job has been helping rich people stay rich. That's my whole job, right? So though I hear stories of the kind of craziness, my world's more like life drama. You know what I mean? It's more like divorces, addiction, it's more
Yep,
that stuff than it is crazy money stuff. Because kind of obviously that group doesn't have financial advisors. So it's kind of interesting.
yeah. So
Okay,
yeah, I guess
so
that would be the set up a budget, set aside funds every time you got a pay raise, make sure the first thing you do is increase the amount you're setting aside. Because it's, in the Navy, they were traditional. When I got commissioned, my peers were making, at the time, it was like $33,000 a year coming out of college as an engineer. And I got commissioned in 1987 and I was making 17. And then, 2 years later, I get promoted and they bumped it up another 10,000. And then another year later, I got another promotion and they bumped. So it gets you very competitive about the time you have to decide whether you're going to get out or not.
that's awesome. So, but the dollar cost averaging is really good advice because I started that really young, and how I picked my amount of money was I looked at what a electric bill was. Back then it was 30, $40. So I said, well, I'm going to add another 30 or $40 and do dollar cost averaging in. And I was surprised. You say it didn't turn into much, but I was surprised. All of a sudden, 20, 25 years later, it turned into 15, 20 grand.
Yeah, and I guess that's fair. I mean, what happened though is my income went up significantly, so it really on the large scale of things wasn't that big of a number because it was
No,
probably
right.
about
You didn't think of that. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So and that's a good thing because as we get older, kind of everything's relative to kind of where we're
Well, and,
at,
and
right?
now the other thing is that you know younger folks need to look at is truly investing into either a 401k or in small business, a SEP, creating up a SEP for yourself because that's tax-free money that you can put into a retirement account and that can grow pretty significantly pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, let's transition to what are you doing now? So, how I know Kurt is a combination of places, but the main thing that I wanted to talk to him about today is his Challenge 22 because he started that almost a decade ago. And it's really helped a lot of veterans because, and I'll let him kind of tell the story, but he saw a huge problem, which also created a big opportunity for him to kind of step into that problem. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing?
Yeah, so when I retired from the military in 2007, I was, serving as a real estate broker and a loan officer, was kind of doing dual hat. The economy was in terrible shape, in 2008, 9, and 10. So I was just trying to find, opportunities wherever they could be. But I sensed that, for my entire life I served, and now I wasn't serving anymore, and it was a huge void. So in 2016, I joined one of the veteran service organizations out there, and I got a note that, I actually volunteered to be the post chaplain, which was an interesting role for me. But I got a note that there was 22 veterans committing suicide every day. And I was like, what? I'm
Wow.
retired and I'm pretty senior officer as far as the officer community is concerned. And I was like, if I don't know about this, then I know that our community doesn't. And I know our community, there are patriots out there who love our veterans and they want to help. So we just need to get the word out. And so we created this organization called Challenge 22 to end veteran suicide. And just to give the folks on the podcast a feel for the scale, since 9/11, we've lost about 160,000 to suicide. In Korea, we
It's
lost
almost unbelievable.
38,000. And in Vietnam, we lost 58,000. So we have lost almost 1.5 times as many from suicide than we lost in combat deaths of two of the major wars that we've been in the last 60 years. And so when you put it in that scale, people realize, hey, this is a big deal. And the crazy part about it is there are solutions out there that we have found that, well, in our 10 years of existence, we started out just as an awareness group that thought we could maybe raise a few dollars. And we raised a lot of money the first year and didn't know what to do with it. And so we started researching organizations outside the VA because the veterans at the time in 2015, 16 were very gun shy about using the VA for mental health services because it was probably an urban legend more than anything, but there was maybe one anecdotal thing where a veteran answered the question, yes, I'm thought about hurting myself. And they took away his Second Amendment rights. And now his name's on a list.
Yeah.
And he's a gun owner that can't own guns. Oh, and by the way, his full-time job is he's a police officer. Well, because he said he needed help and he admitted he was hurt, thinking about hurting himself, he just lost his job. And so the veterans would not be truthful with the VA. And then those that were truthful, most of the times they just put them on drugs. And the drugs, every one of the bottles that they took of the medicine that they gave, you read the side effects, it said has a side effect of suicide. And so here they're giving drugs that are going to cause these guys to, and girls. And so we were like, there's got to be solutions out there. And we started looking into it. And we found just there are many, many organizations that are doing amazing work across a wide range of modalities. One thing we found with post-traumatic stress, and we don't call PTSD because in the world of the VA, the D stands for disorder. And we actually see it as an injury that can be healed. And when you're stuck with a disorder, you're stuck with it for life. And so these organizations have been doing various work, and each veteran responds differently to different things. So we give them options, and we pay for the services. And sometimes the services are pretty expensive. Just a
Yeah.
simple service dog these days is costing anywhere from 35 to $60,000, depending on the dog. And we're finding with our service dog industry is a lot of the veterans that have them, those dogs are aging out because typical dog's life is 9 to 15 years max, and they don't train them for the first couple of years because they're puppies. And so by the time you get him, he's two, and he's got to retire and live the good life at the end. So you're looking at an 8 to 10 year period where that dog is actually working. And so we have a huge need there just to replace the ones that are currently working. So it's amazing that these organizations are doing this work. Their biggest challenge is finding the veterans to connect with because the veteran community is, we're trained to basically not complain, do your job. If it's bothering you, that's your problem, not mine. Figure it out. And so that's what we do. And so as a result, we don't ask for help. And so what we're trying to do is when they finally do raise their hand and say, I need help, we're making it as easy as possible to get there because sometimes the work can be very difficult. They didn't get into a suicidal state because, something good happened. It's some tough stuff that we have to go through to sometimes clear that trauma. So what I just have found is that, you know, well, I'll back up a second. In our 10 years of existence, we've raised close to $700,000. And we've worked with thousands of veterans, first responders, active duty members, and family members. And we have not had a single reported suicide amongst the group that we're working with. So that just
Wow.
tells us what we're doing is working.
Yeah, it's making a difference.
Unfortunately, we are only impacting a very, very small group because we're so small and we're local. And so, I had a conversation with the former Secretary of the VA, the Honorable Peter O'Rourke, who served under Trump for a short period. And then he was my guest speaker one year. And he said, Kurt, the VA is not going to solve this problem. It's going to take a community by community approach. And as a result, you need to take this organization nationwide. And so he planted that seed in me, and then things have happened. And now I'm the engineer and the former Navy guy and the former real estate broker who's trying to create a nationwide company that is a nonprofit. And, anybody that's been in the nonprofit world knows how difficult that is. So it's a labor of love.
Yeah. So let's shift gears and talk a little bit about the setting up and the business side of it. So if you're a small business owner, and I shared this with you earlier, is The Small Business Administration has 35 million entities registered with them. Of those 35 million, 27 million are solopreneurs, do not have an employee. I mean, so the vast majority of small businesses out there are single owned corporations without employees. Now, that doesn't mean they're not hiring people part time, like our 1099 employee, et cetera. So they're not running it by themselves, but for the most part, they're living in their world by themselves. And then what becomes a huge challenge for them, and I know you know this, but I want to just reiterate it, is many of us that are running our solo businesses, we came from an environment that had a lot of guardrails attached to it. Meaning, so like in my world, I always had compliance, I had legal, I had the marketing department. So whatever I wanted to do, I had to make a case for that through a lot of other different entities that then had to come back to me and say, yeah, that's a good idea, or you need to change it, et cetera. What I have found really challenging is now that I'm on my own, I've had to build those guardrails in on with intention, right? I mean, I've had to build like a board. I've had to build like people in my life that will tell me that I'm going down a weird path or something I need to at least slow down on. So with that kind of setting up, to kind of tell us a little bit about it, setting up Challenge 22, what are some of the biggest challenges? And then kind of a little bit about what you see as the opportunities.
Well, what I'll tell you is that, when I came out of the military, the military is the federal government. I was fortunate though in my military career. I probably had 10,000 people that worked for me over the course of my career. Probably 200 of them were military. The rest were civilians. And so I
Oh my
was,
gosh.
as a civil engineer corps officer, we worked the public works and construction aspects of the military. And so our public works departments were just, maybe a couple military and 400 or 500 civilians.
Okay.
And so we worked on a profit and loss basis. So we had to create our own little, profit and loss centers within our organization. And I ran the engineering department for the Public Works Center in Pensacola. But it gave me a good sense of understanding what, how the financial statements, no, they weren't exactly the same. It was kind of along the same terms. And so when I went into real estate, I was a solopreneur. It was me. I didn't care about any of the guardrails. I was just doing, I was
Yeah.
selling stuff. I had to, and then became a broker. I had to follow the rules and be, within the guidelines of the real estate commission.
Yeah,
But
obviously.
it was on my own. When I transitioned and started creating the construction company, the volume went up significantly, but most of it was subcontractors. So, you had to create more and more guardrails, and then the financial management side of it had to be very specific too. Now we take all that experience and you say, okay, I want to create this nonprofit. And the challenge I had with the nonprofit originally is we were working under the shell of the American Legion, which is a 501(c)(19) organization in the nonprofit world. All that means is that they have a special designation by Congress that allows them to lobby for veteran issues. Other 501(c)(3)s can't. The challenge we had was that 501(c)(3)s typically set up in their bylaws that they can only work with other 501(c)(3)s because they don't know about the 19s. But as a result, we could never, we had, private wealth foundations that could not donate to us because we were not a 501(c)(3). So I had to become almost an expert in the nonprofit world and how to set one up. And the more and more I learned about it is, yeah, there's rules and there's guidelines, and they call their financial statements a little different than it's a statement of activities and a statement of cash flows, but it's the same thing. We are a for-profit company. We just don't make a profit.
And the hospitals are a perfect example of that. Almost
Yeah,
every hospital is a nonprofit.
yeah.
Yet, if you look at them, they don't look like nonprofits. They don't run like nonprofits. They don't act like nonprofits.
Yeah. Well, but it's just a title. It's a non-for-profit business. And you have a special designation in the IRS code that allows you to not pay taxes. But other than that, you are a business. You're required
Yes.
to follow all the HR rules and all the accounting rules and all the other things that you have to do. It's the same. The bigger challenge is you now have to get through the stigma that people don't donate to companies that have overhead. And, that's a challenge for the nonprofit world because you do have overhead. And that's your biggest challenge is keeping that overhead low so that people, because they don't want, I have my brother. Yeah, I'll donate to you, Kurt, but it's not going to go to overhead. I want it to go to the programs. Well, you
That's
have
a
to have
good
overhead.
point. I never thought of that.
It's very, very challenging.
And then there's these apps out there that say, "Oh, this is the company that has no overhead," or 90% of it goes to the
Yeah.
need or whatever it is, right? So, and how much of that's actually accurate and not is probably debated,
It,
I would guess.
yeah, I mean, but if you look at a business, the overhead portion of it is usually significantly higher than a nonprofit because they're just basing it and spending their profit to cover their overhead. So it's almost to their advantage to have higher overhead because you don't pay taxes on it because
Most
you get
companies are 60, 70% overhead,
yeah,
right? I mean, if you have a 20 or 30% profit, that would be considered, a massively
yeah.
well-run company.
And in the
Depends on the
nonprofit
industry,
world,
obviously, but
anything greater than 20% overhead
yeah,
is really frowned upon.
I'll be darned.
You can get away with 25 if you're, smaller and but you're doing big things. But and then you have the additional profit problem in the nonprofit world. Like most people have heard of the Wounded Warrior Project. Well, the Wounded Warrior Project was an organization of guys who basically had the coolest marketing logo in the world and a great name. And their timing was perfect because they were connected with a bunch of Pentagon folks right about a month or two before 9/11 happened. And then all of a sudden they needed to start spending some money on helping our soldiers. And so they had this massive influx of cash. The Wounded Warrior Project in 2016 or 17, I can't remember the exact year, they were reviewed because they were spending, now they were a $400 million a year organization. And they were spending about 85 cents on every dollar on salaries and tickets to shows and games. And so it was a complete scam
Uh,
because these guys were just basically profiting off of people's, heartstrings. And unfortunately, what that did for other veteran organizations is it made it harder for us because people become more skeptical about, are you really doing so? Yeah.
yeah, no, I can see that. So when you set it up, what's kind of the structure? So, because I run into this a lot with new businesses that are kind of set up. Did you set up a board before you actually set it up? What was kind of the order that you went through to do some of
Yeah,
it?
so you have to have an initial executive committee to be able to set up and form the corporation. So you have to have a chairman, a secretary, and a treasurer.
That's positive though, because see, if
It
I went
was.
back, just quick, and I don't want to go down too deep on the rabbit hole, but I want to just spend a minute kind of talking. Is when people ask me, what would I do different with my core wealth consultants? Okay, and so I started it as a solo and went through, and now I'm still solo, 12 years later. But if I went back, I tell people this works for me because I'm older and I'm kind of at the end of my career. So what I did makes sense. But if I was 50 years old again and wanting to set something up that I really wanted to grow, I'd start with the board of directors like you did. I literally would start because a lot of the decisions I made early on could have been better had I had a little more pushback.
Yeah. Well, and I don't necessarily would call it pushback. I would call it a second set of eyes,
Yeah, right. That's
a
probably a
different
better way to word it.
perspective,
Yes.
because they were all, when in the nonprofit world, our board cannot be paid. It's you're not allowed to pay. So they're volunteers. And so you have to find people who have a passion and a heart for your cause. And there's two ways people have, different ways of looking at boards, but typically in a nonprofit world, you're trying to find a board of directors matrix of people that are either donating to the cause themselves or connected to those who are going to donate and going out and helping you raise those funds. The challenge we had at Challenge 22 is when we started off as a program within the American Legion, we were a committee. And I had a bunch of veterans who just had beautiful hearts, who hated this problem as much as I did, but they were really good at picking up chairs and tables and moving them around and setting up for meetings and setting up for events. They were not connected with any high net worth individuals, and they were not the ones who had any comfort going out and ask for donations. So our board mix is a little different. And we started out in with one matrix. And over time, my goal is to grow my board to probably 17 or 21 members. I'm at 10, I believe, 11 right now. The next 10 are going to be total fundraisers and people who can help grow the organization financially. Because our goal is instead of making, 100 to $200,000 a year, we want to become a 7, 8 figure organization very quickly because the need is there.
Yeah.
And the only way we're going to be able to expand nationwide and do events all over across the country is we have to have those funds. So, the order was obviously creating the incorporation documents, creating the board, going into the IRS system and getting your designation, which is sometimes very painful, but ours was actually not too bad. We were able to get it pretty quickly. And then just, identifying programs that you're going to do that are going to serve veterans in the community. And so now our mission is to educate the public about what our events are and what our programs are. So we're into social media, we're into creating policies and procedures so that we can, as we grow, we can have an HR policy, and we have a finance committee, and we have a events committee, and so you create these committees where volunteers can get involved. They're not necessarily decision makers at the board level, but they can be hugely influential in what you do. And I think you were talking that we were going to talk a little bit about AI. I will tell you that a month and a half ago, I knew nothing about AI. I mean, I didn't know what a token was or what a hallucination was. I had never touched Chat GPT. People were telling me that I needed to, but it was just another thing that I was afraid that I was going to be, it's that, how much do I invest into this
Yeah, how much
versus
do you
how
get
much I get
sucked
out
in
of
from
it?
a time and
Yeah, and so a confluence of events basically happened that kicked my butt and said, "Hey, you need to do this." And so now I'm very, excited about what AI can do for our organization and going forward in the future, because it can automate a lot of the things that we're spending a lot of time on that really doesn't require us to be spending time on it.
So before we get into AI, I want to just spend a
Yeah.
little bit of time on my experience with nonprofits, and then kind of compare and contrast it to what I would like my world in for profit. And then
Mhm.
you tell me where I'm really wrong, because again, I'm more on the edges of the nonprofit world, right? I've served on a board and done a little bit of stuff, but not much. Okay. And so here's what I find frustrating as someone who wants to engage with a nonprofit, and a challenge that I see with nonprofits. So it's a combination of both of these. So I make these comments, based on those kind of two views.
Sure.
Is when I run into nonprofits, what I find is most nonprofits have two groups of people that run them, okay, and they're the extreme, and it's very frustrating for like someone like me, because in a profit that would be disastrous, and I think it's actually disastrous, I'll argue, in nonprofit, but they don't even recognize it. Is you have a group of people who have a really strong heart for the mission, whatever the mission is, pick it, whatever the mission, doesn't matter. Churches run into this, in my opinion. So you have people who are really, really strong, but they're the ones that move chairs around. They're the ones that will show up and help you do events. They're the ones that'll show up at the events. So they're super important, right? And there's a bunch of them, but they have no money.
Correct.
Okay. And they almost have really no experience. Though they'll give you opinions, they don't really have they're not the right people to help set up an advisory board, as an example. Not that they're not good people, but again, they just don't have the
Mhm.
experience. Okay.
Correct.
And then I find that the other group of people are the really high end, high net worth, where they've kind of made their money and they're done in the business world, right? They're almost in this giving away kind of phase of their lives, right? So their heart's right and they have
Mhm.
lots of money, but
Mhm.
but they're not that engaged. Okay. I mean, even if they're writing big checks, it's still relative to what they have, right? I mean, so one of the challenges that I find in the nonprofits, and I say this from a personal experience because I want to get more engaged in nonprofits, but I'm in that person in the middle. And I find that nonprofits have really nothing to engage that group of people who are actually working 50, 60 hours a week, running a business, and yet they do want to give back and they want to be part of, but they can't really afford just to give without something back, right? I mean,
Mhm.
and that doesn't mean I can't give a couple $1,000 to put a logo on something, right? I don't mean that. I mean more engaging. So unpack that for me. Kind of tell me where I'm wrong, and and
Well,
and, and
I,
what I
I think that you're right. I think there's another category of people too that is not a good category, which is those who create nonprofits just for themselves to be able to give themselves something to do. And
exactly
their
100%.
mission is very, vague, but it creates skepticism amongst those that are looking to donate. I agree with you as far as the volunteer workforce, because that's really what I look for. Because in the nonprofit world, the chief executive, the executive director, there's a staff, they can be paid, but everybody else has to be volunteer. And so you're looking for people who have, a commodity that in our age of, you know, so much happening, volunteer time, that commodity of time is very, very scarce. And so when you find people who are willing to donate their time, you have to honor that and respect that. Because the other thing is, a lot of people sometimes are skeptical about the financial side, but they're willing to give their heart and their physical labor. And I was like that for the longest time. And so that is a group of people that you can definitely utilize, but they're not going to help you grow your organization. And I think that's where you're going with this. And then you've got the check writers who, they want to feel good about what they're doing. They're looking for, but you're right, the impact to them is no more than the lower paid person that, gives $100. It's just
Exactly.
them.
Because they don't even, and a lot of times they don't even bring their skill sets to an organization.
Yeah.
Like those guys, I mean, a lot of them
Yeah.
have run big organizations. They know how to balance sheet, they know how to run, but they don't even bring they bring a check.
Yeah. Yeah. I lost my train of thought there, but I think you're dead on that there are people out there who just, they want to write the check and that's all. And that makes them feel good about themselves. And that's great because you do need those
No,
resources.
right. There's nothing
But
wrong
but
with it.
if they were really philanthropic, they could go a lot further. Oh, I know what I was going to say is there's a lot of foundations out there that they'll either donate to you or they'll have companies will have their employees come work with you because it's required to be able to advance within their career fields. It's a box checking for a lot of them. Foundations, what, 5% of their money has to be given away every year. So there's, sometimes they're just giving away. They don't know, they're not engaging in the massive amount of tools that they have behind the scenes that could help you. They're just giving you a check, which is fine. I'm never going to turn that down. So now to
See,
answer your question, how do you engage the people in the middle? Those who have some, not necessarily quote high net worth, but they're doing well and they've got a nest egg and they don't need it all because they're in their elderly years. But they also want to help physically. They just don't know where they want to jump into. And I think that is where my focus has been right now is creating an environment where people can get involved. And that's where committees come into play. If you have a strong board who leads the committees and the committees have a very sound, strong mission statement for each committee, then people can plug into that without the commitment of being a board member, do it that meets their work schedules. They can offer the expertise. And typically what happens is like I got asked to serve on the West Orange Habitat for Humanity Board of Directors. I had no idea what the organization was. I thought it was they gave homes away. I knew nothing about it. And now I've been on the board for 3 years. And it's one of the more amazing organizations out there because they
it really
actually
is. It's
you have to
amazing.
qualify to get these homes and then you have to make a
Yeah.
mortgage payment on it. And they
You
just
got
hold
to
the note.
work, and there's a bunch of,
Yeah, and there's
yeah.
sweat equity and so but I walked in the door going, oh, I got a construction background. I think I could help them a little bit. And now the more and more I get involved in it, it's not only is it the opportunities become obvious, it's fun. And
Yeah.
that's the other thing you really have to do as an executive director is these have to be fun. And sometimes the mission is not fun because we're ending veteran suicide, but we learned a way to do that in a sense that it's about celebrating America. And when you're celebrating America, that can be a lot of fun.
That is fun. Yeah. So what I think, and I've actually shared this with you, but I'd be curious if anyone's listening to this that can make a comment and say that's a really bad idea or a good idea, whatever you want to do with it. Because I'm totally, I mean this, I don't know, is I still find it interesting that no, I think the biggest opportunity is a better way to word this. I think the biggest opportunity for small nonprofits is to create a business like a better word, the best word I can think of is a mastermind, but I don't know that that's the right word. But I think creating a group of people that contribute 5,000 or $10,000 a month to the organization. And then if you do that, you're also part of this a C12 like you and I are familiar with, but I think it becomes a mini C12. And you meet, maybe it's one time a month for 4 hours and one time a month for 2 hours on a Zoom call. And you're solving business problems that those solopreneurs so desperately need help with. I mean, and they know they need it. They just don't know how to get around it, right? But in a group of, 10 or 8 to 10 other people, that would just be so incredibly valuable. And then one of the businesses, it's not this every month we go and talk about the nonprofit, but in order to be part of the group, you have to be a contributor to the nonprofit. But then the nonprofit just becomes one of the 8 or 9 businesses, right? But you think about doing that over the course of 3, 4, 5 years, the relationships that would be built and the help that would happen would just be incredible. And I am convinced that it's a group of people that nonprofits don't even touch. You might get some money from them, but you're not engaged with them.
Tim, you and I had talked about this a couple months ago, and I thought about it, and there's definitely something here. How to put that together and how to find those individuals, that would that we would need to talk a little bit
No,
more about that.
exactly.
But I think that you're right. I think that again, it's not the hugely high net worth person that's done and they're basically living off the bankroll. It's people still actively making money, but they're just making good money and they want to connect with other people who are making good money and then also have a philanthropic aspect of it where they're helping support a nonprofit.
And more important than all that is you're solving that solopreneur. There's
Right.
27 million of them out there. So I would
Almost like
not
they have
be,
their own board of directors.
I would not be where I can tell you with a high degree of confidence. And those of you that are listening to this, if you go to billcaskey.com or Google Bill Caskey, he's a sales coach. And one of the things that I did when I started Core Wealth Consultants is that I realized very early on that me out there by myself was probably not a good strategy. And I didn't have a board. So what I did was he had a program back then. I can't think of what it was called, but what we did was twice a month, we would do a 2 hour call and it was Zoom. And he just acted as the host. I mean, so it wasn't like he talked a lot, but he moderated is a better way to word it. And there was five of us on that call and we would solve a different kind of issue every single call. And we would spend, the 2 hours. Now, usually there'd be one company that would be highlighted, kind of one problem that someone was working on and go deep, but everyone would have a conversation. So sometimes we'd be talking about marketing. Sometimes we'd be talking about, doing podcasts. Other times we'd be talking about, just whatever we were talking about. And even if it wasn't like I got aha moments doing it, I just found it very insightful and helpful as a small business owner out there by myself. When I was dealing with an issue, I'd run it past those guys and they'd all have an opinion. And sometimes I'd follow, sometimes I wouldn't. But it was more I
Well,
wasn't out
the
there
fact
by
that you're doing
myself.
it periodically, initially it's like anything, you're just not willing to talk a lot and
Yeah.
share. But as one breaks the ice and the next one,
No, and then
figure
you become
I
friends
can
with
talk.
literally a few of them.
Then you start to trust them, and that's the
Yeah.
big. It creates a circle
Anyways.
of trust, and it's almost like it's mini board of advisor.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of an outside the idea, but no one does it. So I just want to be clear, even though I think it's a great idea, it must not be because I don't see any nonprofits doing it.
Well, Tim, I
So,
honestly,
so
I
I
would
want to be like, so I'm not like I totally think this is it. I don't know because why is no one doing it? I find it weird.
Well, and I would tell you that the reason nonprofits are probably not doing it is that, I just completed a course with the University of Central Florida. It was a 8-week long program on financial management for nonprofits
Uh,
under a grant in Orange County. And so I'm seeing these, we had probably 35 different nonprofits in the room. And what I found was that we're so busy doing our day-to-day stuff that even continuing education is difficult. Now, to create a program that's completely separate from what your mission is, one, they probably don't even have the vision of it. And two, if they had the vision of it, they wouldn't know how to implement it. So I would not dismiss it as a bad idea because nobody's doing it. I just would say that I don't think there's enough education about how it could benefit them. And so that's definitely something that you and I need to have further conversations
yeah.
about.
So,
Because
all
if
right.
there's
So
anybody out
let's
there watching, pay attention. Challenge 22 may be
we're
sponsored.
it's challenge 22, and I would really be interested in people commenting on is that something that has any value? Because there are groups like I'm describing, but you pay a lot of money for it. Like C12, I think that's $2,000 a month to be part of something like that, right? I mean, so and the
And
group I was
that's a
part of.
business write-off, but it's not a tax write-off. It's not a donation.
No,
And
right, exactly. And like the group I was part of with Bill Caskey is I think I paid 400 a month for that. You know what I mean? So I mean they weren't free. They were, but I found them incredibly valuable. And I was just like, well, why isn't anyone linking that? Because it does exactly what we described as the challenge. It picks that group up in the middle. Next, what I want to finish up on is now let's have an AI conversation. So talk to me a little bit about my favorite subject of all is kind of what do you see AI doing for small businesses, even before you get into kind of how you're taking it into Challenge 22, but what big opportunities and challenges do you see for the typical entrepreneur when it comes to AI?
so I'm a little hesitant to give advice to people on AI that, especially those that may be, doing it for a while, because literally, Tim, the middle of June, I didn't know what a token was. I
Okay.
did not know what hallucinations was. Now, I have been on an accelerated, fast paced, probably 4 to 5 hours a day binge of learning what AI is. And there's a couple tools that I've, learned it with. There's a guy that does a podcast called Your Everyday AI. And if you
Uh,
want to learn about it, he's got a Start Here series that he's been doing it for 3 years. He's up to episode 850. But at episode 692, he started going through, and about every fourth episode, he would do, for those who need to learn. And so you're learning about current events happening in the AI world, but you're also learning this, the nomenclature and the systems and the companies and, who the large language model enterprises are, the OpenAI, and then you got Gemini, and you got Microsoft with Copilot, and then you got Anthropic with, with their products. And then of course, X and Meta are also kind of starting to become players. But what has been interesting about it is in the he said this industry was, chatbot based, prompt based for the beginning, years that we were doing it, and it would change about every 6 to 8 months. And now what he's seeing is now that we've got, when Anthropic came out with Claude desktop to be able to do the agentic AI work, and now, with OpenAI having Codex and or 5.6, they now have the ability to have the regenerative AI and this thing called RSI, which is the recursive self-improvement. And now these models are changing weekly. Something just happened at the end of June. Claude came out with their product Fable, and then OpenAI came out with their 5.6, which has three versions. It's, Sol, which is sun, Terra, which is earth, and Luna, which is the moon. And each one was a smaller version of the others, and they were, less expensive to operate. Well, what happened was the 5.6 Sol model actually it distilled its own product. It taught Luna how to be as effective as Claude's Fable for what did he say, 25x cheaper. Not 25%, but 25 times
X.
cheaper, doing basically the same product. And so it's moving very, very fast.
Right.
And so, yeah, with all that, so I'm learning the nomenclature, I'm learning the big picture stuff, but how to create the workflows and the things like that. Our decision was, as we haven't really built this company into anything yet, and as we go nationwide. So what a lot of companies and solopreneurs are going to face is you have systems, and now you're going to take this AI and you're going to try to put it on top of your systems, and that's difficult to do because your system may be broken. And so you're just trying to fix a broken system. I looked at it as I have an opportunity to create a company based on AI and create my systems using AI, whether it's in the HR world, whether it's in the finance world, whether it's in the event planning world, whether it's in the social media world, whether it's in the podcast, whatever that may be. I'm going to create an AI model and engine that's going to do that. And it will minimize my volunteer requirements so that my volunteers can focus on things like the events.
Yeah.
And
That's exciting.
so that's how I see eventually doing this. I'm not there yet. To give advice to folks on this, I would just say, but the other thing, part of this UCF class wasn't they threw out this free class which was called AI for Nonprofits, and they're like, it's normally like a $500 class, but we're going to give it to you for free, but you got to self-pace. So you had to learn it all on your own, which is very difficult. But the point of all that is, as I was learning, and this guy I know that does the podcast, Your Everyday AI, he talks about this thing called the silver tsunami. And the silver tsunami is all those people who have the domain experience. It's the lifelong experiences of being in business or being in the world. And so when something gets dumped out by AI that doesn't make sense, we can see it immediately. We know what our workflows are supposed to be. We know what's supposed to the products. We know immediately. What I saw was these college kids that were running the AI portion of the program would push a button and have no clue how it was working and whether it was right or not, because they have zero work experience.
Yeah.
And so we, as the older, if you've got 10 to 20 to 30 years left in the workforce, you need to get into this because, you know, I kind of liken it to, I remember the first time I ever had to give somebody a credit card and actually write a check from my computer and pay a bill from my computer. I'm like, I'm giving my bank account information over, it
Right.
was scary. And now it's nothing. I mean, it's how you function. You tap your card to something and money gets transferred. We rely on that. And I think AI is going to be there very, if it's not there now, there still makes mistakes. And that's where you as the experienced person who, I've got the silver hair. I'm part of the silver tsunami. Unfortunately, I would
I
say
am
you
too.
too, but
Yeah.
you're kind of a little thin up there, Tim.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
But
I
I
am
think it's pretty cool.
convinced what you just said. I absolutely agree with you 100% because I think people are worried about like what happens to jobs. I think experts are going to become more experts with AI, and I worry about how are people going to learn without the experience, right? I mean, we're going to create a room. I got into a conversation with one of my friends that is a high up executive, and he was talking about, his call center. And I said, you're going to have to figure out how to make sure you don't have just a bunch of AI zombies. That, yeah, it's a live person answering the phone, but they're just looking at AI to give them the answer. They're not really learning the financial services business. They're learning to ask AI a question, right? And then they're learning how to parrot that answer. And then that ain't even talking about the people who are taking AI and making it their phone systems, right? So the people who are very knowledgeable about the business or in whatever it is, whether you're a doctor, or an engineer, financial advisor. I think it's going to make all of us, anyone that's an expert in a particular field, more of an expert.
It will. I think that, I'm not on the side that this is going to create a massive amount of new jobs. There will be new jobs, but there's going to be a lot of jobs that are going to go away because the things that can be done, like people who write code, forget it. It's done. You don't need to be a code expert how to write code. You just tell your codex to do it for you. You just need to know what you want out of it. But there will be other opportunity. Life is like anything. It finds opportunity to gainfully employ, and hopefully at the end of the day, what comes out of this. Because the other thing is they've seen this I mean, trillions, billions, and trillions of dollars invested in AI, and they're not seeing the return on the investment. And the reason is the person sitting at the desk is the one getting the return right now. They're able to do their job in about 60%, if not more, less time. And so they're just working from home and they're going to play golf and they got their AI doing the work for
And we're paying $20 a month. I mean, I see this as I was part of the internet boom because I worked at Schwab for a decade. And at the end of Schwab, I actually went to an AI workshop, and what he said, he went with it more like it's, all the negatives about AI. And when he got done, I told him, I said, I came out of the 90s. I was literally part of the whole internet boom. And Schwab was one of the very front runners in kind of getting on the internet and utilizing the internet. And when I heard him, I was very nice about it. So this wasn't a confrontation, but I said, one thing we got to be careful about is everything you just said. If I replaced AI with internet and put you back in 1999, it would have fit. You
them.
realize everything you just said. And everyone worrying about jobs, everyone thought internet was going to take jobs. It made jobs. It created jobs. I mean,
Huge.
everyone thought that internet was going to, it just created the productivity gains were so big.
Yeah.
But here's the part that people like me are definitely going to miss. I'll be way I'm going to miss the years. I miss the internet because I thought the internet was going to happen in 2003, was going to have all of it. It actually took 2010
Right.
before
Till
the
social media.
internet was actually, really productive because the internet, it took that many years for kind of the intranets and companies to get up and running, all
Yep.
that kind of stuff. But I think the same thing's probably going to happen with AI is I think it won't happen as fast as I personally think, but it'll still happen over the next 3 to 5 years.
Well, the other thing that people have to think, and this is where it's part of my paradigm shift in my thinking, is, I always thought AI was you put something in, you get something out.
Yeah, it was zeros and ones.
It's a glorified Siri or
Yeah,
Google search. It is so much more than that.
right.
I mean, I guess where I started to finally go, okay, I need to learn this was a couple years ago. I bought my wife a Tesla, and she no longer drives. She does not drive. She gets in her car and she pushes a button and tells her where to go, and
Yeah.
it takes her there. If it's raining and she's at a restaurant, she pushes a button on her phone and the car comes to her, so she doesn't have to walk across the parking lot. It is, Musk has taken this concept of, I want to colonize the moon, and everything he's doing is designed to colonize the moon. But, you think about if we no longer had drunk drivers, how many millions of people's lives would not be affected by it because nobody's driving drunk anymore because the cars are all driving themselves. Yeah, there are going to be mistakes and there's going to be accidents and those things are going to happen. They're going to get glorified in the news. But how many times has a family had a tragedy where somebody just got in a car who could not function and drove home and killed their daughter.
Or even less, even more often than that is a 80-year-old person shouldn't be driving. Their skill set's not at the level that was when they were 60, as an example. And so if we're using Tesla, I get in debates with my wife. I have a Tesla too. So my wife will say this thing doesn't drive very good. I'll start laughing. I say, well, it's got 8 billion miles of experience. So it's a way better driver than me or you.
Oh, it puts me to shame. I still like driving, and so I will
So
fight
do
it.
I. I'm only 50% full
Yeah,
self-driving.
I
I'm
like.
not
I
like
mean,
Lana.
and it's not because I don't trust it. I just like driving.
Exactly.
And the thing that the Tesla's done a good job of, and we're way off subject here, but it watches your eyes. So even though you're in self-drive mode, you cannot be looking at your phone because it will kick you off self-drive. And if it kicks you off like 3 times a month, you lose that experience. And it's like $100 a month to use. I mean, it's not cheap. But I think in the long run, when I got into a taxi and a Waymo taxi in San Francisco a couple of years ago, that was probably the most surreal experience I've ever had because there was no driver. So, but my point is that technology has its flaws. It's going to make mistakes, but it's moving very fast. And we have to learn more than just Google searching and using that as our AI. AI can do, it can work for you when you're sleeping. You create and tell it to do something and let it go to cook all night long. And then when you wake up in the morning, everything's set for you, ready to go. And if it's wrong, you adjust it.
I agree 100%. And it comes back to, I sound like I'm kind of back to making this pitch, but I don't care. It's more just, it summarizes what I just said. There's more and more of these solopreneurs. They'll take their classes, they'll watch YouTube. But if I was in a group of 7 people, like you and I and 6 or 5 other people, we were talking for 2 hours on what are the key things we're doing with AI. I assure you, I'm leveraging it, but I'm probably not as efficient and as productive as I could be if I just was walking through, here's the problem I'm solving, and then here's how 3 people are doing it, and then I pick a model. But we're really not off subject because if you look at Tesla, Tesla is for those of you who haven't read the book Algorithm, I cannot recommend it more. I cannot, there's no business book that I've read that's had more impact on me than back in the day when Welsh used to write books. And it's basically the president of Tesla, and he wrote it he was president from 2012 to like 2018, and he talks about the order that they went through to kind of get there. Well, remember, AI is built based on those algorithms, right? I mean, the AI is designed for us to be aware of how it wants to walk through and do steps. And so,
Yeah,
if
I did read the book and
you did,
one of the, yeah, and one
did
of
you
the
enjoy it?
Yeah, it was good. I bought it on Audible and listened to it on Audible.
Okay.
But one thing that jumped out at me was when they were dealing with the manufacturer of the chassis and all the different, they had to have hundreds of robots to put all the pieces together. And because they could not figure out a way to do a one pour chassis. And in time, they were able to figure that out. Now they've revolutionized the auto industry because they're doing these, carbon composite material chassis that are just, they're strong enough, but they're flexible enough. And it's one process. It's not 100 different things working together that can trip over themselves. And
I know
that's
it's
one of
crazy. My
the big.
favorite part is the delete until you have to add stuff back. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
I
well,
found that
if you
just
haven't read
fascinating.
Musk's book, that's his thing. He just said, I cut 80% of it, and if I got to put 20% back, then I put it back. And that makes so much sense because it's like things just happen because it's always been done that way.
Yeah, exactly. So
And
it
when I
forces
was
you
in
to
the
think
Navy, when
through.
we transferred every 2 to 3 years, I was very good at that because I wouldn't come in and just do things because that's the way they did it. I need to know why.
Yeah,
But I never took the 80% rule, but I'd probably take, we're going to cut 70% of this,
that's huge.
60%. So,
Well, so tell me how. I really appreciate it. It's been a fun conversation. We went over.
yeah.
So let some. How do people get a hold of you? Give a summary of kind of who you're looking for to kind of reach out to you and how they get a hold of you.
Yeah, I think probably the easiest way is via email or text me. My phone number, and I have no problem giving it to you because it's out there anyways. It's 407-701-9416. And my email is my name, Kurt Gies. It's KurtGies @gmail.com. And our website for Challenge 22 is challenge22walk.com.
Yep.
Don't
So
put in
go to
Challenge
Challenge
22 because
22
there's some
Walk and
vegan company that took our Challenge 22, but it's challenge22walk.com.
which is awesome. Yeah. So then
But I would
and you
love to,
I'm sure you
anybody
want
who
to.
wants to get involved, help veterans, If you're local to Winter Garden, we're doing our 10th annual walk coming up on November 14th. We have a goal to have 2,200 people in our community walk for the 22 veterans who take their lives every day due to post-traumatic stress. These folks served our country and they deserve a little bit of recognition to come back and say, hey, you were worthy, your families, we recognize what they did was important, and I'm going to walk 2.2 miles in honor of that veteran. So come out and join us. It's a beautiful, fun day. It's our 10th annual. Let's blow it out of the water, Winter Garden.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thanks again, Kurt. I really appreciate you taking the time.